I've hosted Beat the Press since its inception, because it was my inception in 1998. Greater Boston started in 1997, and we didn't used to have a Friday show because something called The Long and the Short of It was on Friday. And then when Friday opened up, I asked if we could do this. Way back when I was in local news in the late 70s and early 80s, all the newspapers had these media critics, and mostly they were criticizing television. They'd never produced a show in their lives, they'd never hosted a show in their life, they didn't know what it was like to be Chet and Natalie, but they criticized them ruthlessly, ruthlessly and endlessly. And I always thought I wanted to broaden that into something that included television, but included radio, newspapers, magazines, social media. And so I put together a pilot when I was in New York in the mid-90s. I found somebody who wanted to sponsor it, gave me like $20,000 or whatever it was. I produced this pilot at the Queens Astoria Studios. A lot of that stuff still holds up. Obviously it's changed dramatically, but so I had a pilot that I could take around and say, here's what I'm talking about. And that's really how it got going. This is actually a show that I own. I have the trademark. I trademarked it when I first started it over 25 years ago, before I actually had a venue for the program. And I actually had a battle with the trademark because Arianna Huffington was trying to trademark the same title at the same time. And for a while, we were thinking about doing something together, but she had an idea that was completely different from mine. So I raced her to the trademark office and won. John Carroll was kind of my colleague. He was the executive producer of the show, but we wrote the pieces together. I was the host, but he was sort of my partner in crime. I miss him to this day. He was so good, so clever. I'm using some of his sound and little clips of some of his pieces. It has its own gestalt, and it's not something that's really easy to just jump into, especially if you're a day-to-day journalist. You have to really understand the rhythm of it. There's a sassiness to it, and trying to write a Beat the Press piece takes a special skill, and it takes a special ear, because you're cultivating from so many different sources, and you have to have an angle. You have to know what theme you're picking up on that week, what trends are running, and then find the examples of the trends that you're talking about. Sometimes we call these pieces the kitchen sink. We know what's out there, but finding the bits and pieces to throw into the stew is not always so easy. We let each other talk. There's a level of civility that you don't always see on commercial because it's much faster. People talk over each other. You even see that in cable. I don't mind a little bit of crosstalk. That always adds a little bit of light, and sometimes a dialogue or a disagreement is good. But you want to be able to hear what people are saying. And I think that's one of the big differences in most public television arenas, that you're allowed to speak, you're allowed to finish your thoughts. Not always. Who am I thinking of? John McLaughlin, the McLaughlin Group. They didn't always let each other finish, but we certainly do. I actually think that the need to be first, as opposed to the need to be accurate, has changed for the good over recent years because of 24-hour news and just the way, the quickness of which, Instagram and Facebook and everything, and all the ways that we gather news now that didn't exist. When I first got into the news business, you don't know what you're looking at. You don't know if it's something that's made up. And I think that people have gotten much more savvy about saying, here's what we're hearing, this is what we've seen, we don't know all the facts. And I really believe that most legitimate news organizations are concerned with that first. A breaking news story builds and it crescendos. And you look at what happened here with the Boston Marathon bombing. There was not misreporting, but some wrong reporting along the way. And it gets quickly corrected and it moves on. So I do think there's more caution. Everybody wants to be first. Everybody wants to have the exclusive. But I think we've been chastised just enough to recognize that it's more important to be accurate. For this special, I feel overwhelmed by the number of examples, and there's no way I could go back and look at all. We did approximately 48 shows a year for 20 years. There's no way I could look at them all. So I ended up looking at our year in review shows just to sort of remember what the big stories were that year, and then going back and picking up little clips from that. So now I'm recreating in my 20-year anniversary show kind of the same thing I do in a weekly show, but with a much bigger kitchen sink. We've decided to kind of put it into categories, and the hardest thing was whittling down into categories. One of them is the massive changes in the local media landscape, so we're going to focus on that. Another one is just like all the stories that have come and gone that were just obsessive coverage, Deflategate and that kind of thing. Another one that was really, really critical is about things gone wrong or crimes committed by various news organizations and reporters. I mean, when I first got going and beat the press, it was the summer of Mike Barnacle and Patricia Smith. So that's kind of a jumping off point, but there have been many, many others since then. And finally, to kind of end it on an upbeat note, we're going to talk about media triumphs, things that the media covered that either had a really positive outcome or an important outcome, like the scandal in the Catholic Church, or even the capture of Whitey Bulger, which really the media had a lot to do with. WBZ was instrumental in that, and of course, the Boston Globe tracked down the person who was the tipster in that story. We're going to put the Boston Marathon bombing in that category too, because there was a lot of really, really fine reporting that was done around that time. Clearly, I don't do this alone, and over the past 20 years, I've had some fabulous producers and helpers, including the team that we have right now: Antonia Caban, Courtney Kennedy, Azita Garamani, Jen Sifferlin, and Christina Bien. It's like there's a long list of people who really pitch in every day, and of course my old colleagues, John Carroll, Linda Pollack was the producer for a while. So we've had a long list of people who have contributed, and they get me too. So that's helpful. It's something that I hope to see, go past my time here at WGBH, whenever that might be, but we'll see.